Hallie Jackson has been following all of this from Washington. Hallie, these attacks have been called out as racist across the board. Why is it the president still going after the squad today?
Yeah, because here we are, Allison, day 9, I think, of the president continuing to go after this group of women. He calls them AOC plus 3. That's the sort of new nickname that he unveiled for them today at that conservative Turning Point USA rally that he was speaking at. You know, you did that fact check, and I think that's important to note about what, for example, Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez did or did not say. I should point out, though, that has not stopped the president from continuing to repeat those kinds of claims. He clearly sees this as a political winner for him, and frankly, so do his Republican allies, people in his circle here in and around Washington and well beyond. And you're starting to see that in these Republican circles. The idea that if the thinking goes, if they can sort of paint the Democratic Party and these 4 freshman progressive lawmakers as the face of Democrats moving forward, then perhaps that could actually help President Trump in areas that aren't so comfortable, parts of the country that aren't so ready to embrace more progressive and liberal policies. And, for example, the Midwest, places like Michigan and Ohio, places where President Trump will need to do well come 2020 to succeed. Allison?
Hallie, outside of those Republican circles, what other reaction are you hearing in Washington today to the fact that he just, keeps going on with these attacks?
It's funny you ask that because I'll tell you, we're in this sort of news cycle now where it has been more than a week since the president started those attacks. The racist tweet that came out, last Sunday now, a week and several days ago, all the way through till today. And I think that last week is when you saw a lot of the outrage, a lot of the concern. And I think at this point, you're sort of starting to see some Democrats, I would imagine, give more of kind of an eye roll, if you will, more of the same from President Trump, because many of them, including, for example, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, very aggressively have already come out and denounced the president's actions and words here as it relates to these 4 women, have fiercely defended them, and are sort of letting that speak for itself.
Hallie, if you don't mind, let's look ahead to tomorrow. What's the president saying today about the Mueller testimony?
Yeah.
We know yesterday he said he wouldn't be watching very closely.
Well, he said that, but then he said, no, I'll probably watch. So it's a little bit of mixed messaging from President Trump. And I would imagine, I actually just had a conversation with folks here, sources inside the administration. And listen, the president has a light schedule tomorrow. We know that. So chances are he will likely watch some of it. That's based on my analysis from having covered him for a number of years. This is a president who likes to be engaged in whatever the sort of cultural moment is, right? And tomorrow here in Washington, the moment is certainly all about Robert Mueller. So I wouldn't be surprised to see the president react in some way, whether that's on Twitter, whether that's in person, if we see him tomorrow at all, to what's been going down. There is not a coordinated strategy, if you will, between the president's advisors here at the White House, his legal team, and others. The president has been talking about this, I'm told, with folks in his orbit, but he kind of understands that this is happening. There's nothing he can do to stop it. His Republican allies, I think you'll see tomorrow, will be trying to defend the president on Capitol Hill in this Q&A session with Robert Mueller, trying to ask pointed questions to get what they want out of it, which is essentially to, in their view, argue that the FBI investigation was sort of rotten at its core that led to the Mueller report. Democrats obviously will be asking pointed questions to get the opposite out of Robert Mueller. They want to hear him talk about more the potential obstruction of justice by President Trump that was looked into. So you got both sides with a big stake in this, and you've got hundreds of thousands of people all around the country who will be watching very, very closely.
All right, Hallie Jackson, Chief White House Correspondent, thanks so much.
Sure.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.